The photograph is small enough to disappear inside a manila folder, the kind that smells of dust and damp paper even before you open it. It shows a bank lobby in 1930, marble underfoot, brass catching the light, people standing in orderly lines as if order itself could be deposited and withdrawn. At first glance, it's the sort of image that would be used in a commemorative brochure, proof that a city was modern and safe. And then your eyes drift to the right side of the frame, to where the stonework breaks its own pattern. This story begins with renovation noise, drills, dropped screws, the dry cough of plaster coming apart. In the spring of a recent year, a regional bank in an old northeastern downtown, Providence, Worcester, one of those places where the streets still remember streetcars, began converting its original headquarters into a boutique branch and office space. The building had been standing since the late 1920s, an Art Deco monument to confidence, designed to make ordinary people trust a room full of money they would never touch. On the third week, a contractor named Ray Dougherty noticed something that bothered him. It wasn't dramatic. It was carpentry, the kind of wrongness you only see after years of watching how buildings settle and how repairs try to lie about it. A wall on the right side of the lobby, near what used to be a public writing desk, didn't match the rest. The base molding was a fraction too high. The plaster was smoother than the surrounding stone, and when the crew removed a section of paneling to run new conduit, the hollow sound behind it didn't behave like hollow space should. It answered back, deeper, like a throat. They stopped work and called the bank's facilities manager. The manager called the city's historic preservation liaison, who called the building's landlord, who called someone else. And by late afternoon, the lobby had that cautious, quiet feeling of a place suddenly aware it has an audience. The decision was made to bring in a structural engineer before anyone opened anything. No one wanted a headline about a collapse or a lawsuit or, worse, an accident that turned into a story. The engineer, a woman named Dr. Celeste Morrow, arrived with a small flashlight and a notebook that made her look less like an expert and more like a witness. She walked the lobby slowly, not staring at the wall so much as listening to the building around it. The faint vibration of traffic, the whisper of air through old vents. Then she tapped the plaster with her knuckles and crouched to the lowest corner where the baseboard met the floor. There, in the seam where the newer surface met an older frame, a thin gap had opened with time, just enough to catch a shadow that did not belong to a flat wall. Ray later described it as a negative shape, which is a strangely perfect phrase. The gap wasn't showing a door. It wasn't showing a handle. It was showing absence, space falling away, angling down. When Celeste shone her light across it, the beam grazed something with edges. The faint suggestion of the first step, stone worn smooth, as if feet had once known it by heart. That's when the photograph surfaced. It came from the bank's own storage, in a locked file cabinet that no one seemed quite sure who held the key to anymore. Tucked among insurance binders and old electrical plans was an envelope stamped with a date, 1930, and a typed label, Lobby Alterations, South Wall. Inside were 2 prints and a brittle memo that had been folded and unfolded enough times to soften at the creases. One print was a clean, proud view of the lobby, taken from the main entrance. The other was the one that matters. The same lobby, the same orderly line of hats and coats, but with the right side of the frame, catching a freshly plastered section that interrupts the stone like a bandage. In that older photo, the plaster looks new, too new. And yet the camera has captured what the plaster failed to fully hide. Near the bottom, inside the seam, there's a narrow wedge of darkness. A triangular shadow gap, like a mouth not quite closed. And beside it, slightly crooked, a small brass plaque partly swallowed by the wall, the lower line still legible enough to sting. Stairs. A staircase, in a bank lobby. Sealed up, not simply closed. At this point, there are obvious explanations, the kind that calm you down because they're practical. A private stair for executives, a service stair for janitors, a security route to the vault level, a forgotten fire escape replaced when codes changed. People said all of these things that first day, almost eagerly, as if naming possibilities could prevent the building from choosing the worst one. But the photo refuses to cooperate with comfort. The wall looks hurried, like a correction made under pressure, not a planned remodel. The plaque being left behind feels like a mistake no careful institution would make. And if this was merely a service route, why seal it instead of locking it? Why bury it behind plaster that tries to pretend it never existed? Celeste asked for permits. The city archive produced a thin folder of approvals from 1928 to 1932. Electrical upgrades, window replacements, a note about reinforcing the teller's cages after an attempted robbery in 1931. But there was no clear record of sealing a stair, no diagram showing where it went, no mention of an access route being eliminated in a building where access routes are everything. The central question forms quietly, the way dread does. Not where does it lead, that's geography, and geography can be solved. The question is, who needed that stair badly enough to build it, and who needed it gone badly enough to erase it? By nightfall, the renovation site was locked down, not with caution tape, but with a kind of embarrassment. The bank didn't want curiosity, the landlord didn't want liability, and Ray, who had only wanted to run conduit and go home, found himself holding a print from 1930 and realizing that someone back then had stood in that same lobby and noticed the same wrongness, enough to photograph it, label it, and file it away like a secret that could be managed. If you're the sort of person who listens for what buildings try not to say, leave a like, subscribe, and comment. Celeste Morrow's first instinct wasn't to break the wall. It was to make the wall talk without opening its mouth. She photographed the seam from 3 angles, measured the molding, and ran her palm along the plaster the way a doctor listens for a fracture. The patch was older than it looked. She could tell by the hairline crazing and the way dust had settled into it, yet newer than the stone around it by decades. A repair done long enough ago to become part of the building's story, and still done too fast to be proud of. The next morning she met us at the city archives, a limestone building with radiators that clanked like reluctant confession. The permit folder was thin, but not empty. In 1929, the bank filed for interior modifications, vague language that could mean anything from moving a desk to moving a boundary. In 1930, there was an inspection note that caught Celeste's eye, an amendment requiring egress clarity in the lobby level. That's the sort of phrase officials use when they don't want to write what they really saw. And then 2 months later, there was nothing. No follow-up diagram, no stamped plan showing what had been changed. A retired fire inspector named Frank Soloway agreed to speak with us on the record, mostly because he hated gaps in paperwork more than he hated strangers. He had the posture of a man who'd spent decades telling owners that buildings don't care about excuses when they burn. When Celeste showed him the 1930 print, he stared for a long time at the right side of the frame, at the plastered interruption and the crooked plaque. "That's not a fire stair," he said finally. "Fire stairs announce themselves. They want to be found." He pointed at the visible wedge of darkness near the baseboard. Even through grain and age, you could see the angle was steep. That's a service pitch, maybe even a utility pitch. But service stairs don't get plaques, not in a lobby. So we followed the plaque. The bank's memo called it simply "Auto Stairs," as if the top line wasn't worth recording, or as if someone had torn it off in haste. Celeste tracked down a local metalworks company that had supplied brass signage to public buildings in the 1920s. The company name had changed twice and survived 3 mergers, but the old order books, miraculously, still existed on microfilm. A librarian helped spool through them, page after page of neat handwriting. Courtroom, women, telegraph, vault. Then, in late 1928, a line item. Meridian Trust, lobby plaques, 6 PCs. No wording, no destinations, just quantities. It should have been a dead end. It almost was. Because at the same time, another narrative started to build around the stair. One that felt smoother, easier to repeat. A local historian we interviewed, Dr. Wallace Keene, suggested the bank might have connected to an old utilities tunnel. Downtowns like this often had them. Passages for steam lines, coal delivery, sometimes even Prohibition-era smugglers if you wanted the romantic version. The building's original blueprints, when they finally surfaced in a private collection, did show a sub-basement. And a sub-basement always invites people to imagine a secret. Ray liked that theory. So did the landlord. A tunnel story is exciting without being accusatory. It turns a hidden stair into a quaint artifact, an architectural Easter egg. But the photograph kept resisting the story we wanted. Celeste made a high-resolution scan of the print and began enlarging the lower right corner where the seam met the floor. Under magnification, the shadow gap wasn't just shadow. There was texture, parallel lines like anti-slip strips set into stone treads. Not the kind you install for coalmen in boots. The kind you install where you expect regular traffic, fast, day after day. And then she noticed something else. A faint paint transfer on the plaster just above the baseboard, like a ghost of lettering that had been rolled over without sanding first. 2 characters barely there but consistent. R2. Room 2, or Record 2, or Receiving 2. That small, bureaucratic little code did more damage than any rumor about tunnels. It suggested a system, a labeling convention, a destination that mattered enough to categorize. We took the code to the bank's corporate archivist, an overworked woman named Eliza Marn, who spoke with the careful neutrality of someone surrounded by other people's secrets. Eliza insisted the building had never housed anything non-banking in its public history. When Celeste asked about R2, Eliza's eyes flickered, just once, to the edge of the photo, where the plaque sat crooked. She said she didn't know. Then she added too quickly that basement rooms were often labeled for storage. Frank Soloway wasn't convinced. Storage doesn't need concealment, he told us later. Storage doesn't get erased. By the end of the week, we had 2 competing versions of the same staircase. A harmless utility route that led to pipes and coal, and a deliberately hidden passage that led somewhere a plaque once had to name. Both couldn't be true, and the only thing we knew for certain was this. In 1930, someone took a photograph of that wall while it was being sealed, as if they expected that someday the building would pretend it was always solid stone. By Friday, the lobby had stopped feeling like a work site and started feeling like a crime scene that had forgotten its own crime. The contractors moved quietly, tools laid out and untouched. The bank kept the front doors open for business, but they'd shifted the customer line away from the right wall with velvet rope, like etiquette could keep curiosity contained. Every time someone glanced over, they saw only plaster and stone. Nothing that admitted it once had depth. Celeste's next move was mundane enough to be dangerous. She asked for the building's fire routes, not the public ones. The ones filed, revised, and refiled each time codes changed. Each time an owner learned how to say compliance without saying access. The landlord produced a set of mid-century schematics, 1957, stamped and yellowed, with the calm confidence of someone offering a tidy answer. They showed mechanical rooms, a boiler, a sub-basement labeled storage, and nothing else. The right wall in the lobby was drawn as solid. No stair, no corridor, a clean lie. But Celeste didn't look at the lobby level first. She looked at the negative spaces, the places the draftsman had avoided. In the sub-basement, behind the boiler outline, there was a rectangular void boxed in by thick ink, like an omission framed by certainty. The space wasn't labeled. It wasn't hatched. It was simply not spoken about. "Why would you draw around a room and pretend it isn't there?" she asked. Eliza Marn, the corporate archivist, took that question personally. She returned the next day with a cardboard tube of older plans she'd just located, her tone making it clear the discovery was either a coincidence or a concession. These were closer to the original construction, late 1920s, inked in elegant lines, the kind of drafting that treated buildings as promises. And in those plans, the void had a name. Not a dramatic one, not a secret name. A clerk's name, R2. Receiving room 2. Receiving what exactly in the sub-basement of a bank? That's where Dr. Wallace Keene's tunnel theory finally lost its grip. Utility tunnels don't get numbered receiving rooms. They get pipes. They get valves. They get grime and anonymity. A receiving room is a place where something arrives. Regularly. Predictably. with paperwork. Frank Soloway saw it too, and for the first time his certainty sounded tired. "Receiving rooms are for deliveries," he said. "But they're also for people. If you don't want people coming through the front, you build a receiving door in the back." We drove the alley behind the bank, where the city narrows into service lanes that still smell like coal when the rain hits just right. There was an old bricked-over archway at the building's rear, half hidden by dumpsters and conduit, its keystone still carved with the bank's original name. Above the brick infill, an iron hook jutted out, the kind used for hoisting crates, or trunks, or anything you'd rather lift than carry where customers could watch. Ray found the detail that made the air go cold. Beneath layers of paint on the brickwork, there was a patch where the coating had flaked away to reveal older letters, stenciled in black. "Deliveries, basement." And below that, smaller, almost apologetic, "No public." Eliza tried to frame it as normal. "Banks received cash shipments," she said. "Paper, equipment. It doesn't mean—" But Celeste had been staring at the 1930 photograph again, hunting the edges of the frame like they were margins in a confession. She enlarged the left side this time, where the teller cages reflected the lobby in warped brass. In the reflection, blurred but unmistakable, there was a door standing ajar in the background. And on that door, a sign. Not a vault sign. Not a staff-only sign. 2 words, white on dark. The kind of lettering you'd see in municipal buildings. Relief intake. The bank lobby, in 1930, had an intake. Keene went quiet when he saw it, the way a man does when his favorite story becomes someone else's grief. Frank swore under his breath. Ray stared at the print like it had betrayed him. Relief intake didn't mean charity in the sentimental sense. In 1930, in cities like this, relief was a system. Means tests, interviews, moral judgments disguised as forms. It was hunger being processed into categories: deserving, undeserving, employable, unfit. And banks, especially trust companies, didn't just hold money then. They sat at the junction where foreclosures, wages, and municipal funding met. They knew which families were slipping before the families did. Celeste began pulling newspapers from that winter, and the headlines were what you'd expect. Layoffs, breadlines, a new emergency committee chaired by prominent businessmen. Then a small notice, easy to miss among advertisements. The city had opened a temporary relief office, in partnership with local financial institutions, to centralize applications and ensure proper distribution. If you were ashamed to ask for help, the bank was the last place you'd want to be seen entering. Unless you didn't enter. Unless you were routed down. Suddenly, the sealed stair didn't feel like a quirk. It felt like infrastructure, designed to move people out of sight to keep the marble lobby clean of desperation. A hidden descent from public trust into private judgment. And the most unsettling part was how ordinary the evidence looked when you finally saw it. A stenciled "No Public," a numbered room, a reflected sign on a door that shouldn't have been there at all. On Monday, the bank finally granted access to the sub-basement. On paper, a safety inspection. In practice, a supervised descent into what the building remembered. The entrance they used wasn't the sealed stair. It was a modern utility door behind a keypad, opened by a facilities supervisor who tried to sound bored and failed. The air down there was colder, heavy with the mineral smell of old concrete and the sweet, metallic trace of rust. You could hear the city through the walls, but muffled, as if the street had been wrapped in cloth. The room marked storage on the 1957 schematics was exactly what you'd expect. Stacked chairs, abandoned file cabinets, a rolled carpet that looked like it had been hiding for years. But behind a row of cabinets, Celeste found the edge of the unlabeled void from the plans. A seam where the concrete had been poured in 2 different eras. Someone had built a second wall in front of an older one, not flush, leaving a narrow corridor that went nowhere on any official map. Ray squeezed in first, shoulders scraping. His flashlight beam caught a door frame bricked up from the inside. Not a modern cinder block job, older brick laid carefully, then painted over as if to make it seem original. The paint had bubbled in places, and in one blistered patch you could see pencil marks trapped beneath it, faint and stubborn. A date and a set of initials. Jan 1931, ELM. Eliza Marn stared at those letters so long her face seemed to forget it was being watched. "Those aren't mine," she said, but she didn't sound sure. Her grandfather, we learned later, had worked in the bank's trust department. His full name was Edmund L. Marn. Celeste asked for one thing: permission to remove a single brick, only enough to confirm what sat behind. The landlord hesitated, then nodded like a man granting mercy he didn't believe in. The brick came out with a dry crack. Dust spilled, and through the opening the flashlight found the underside of steps, stone treads descending from above, exactly aligned with the shadow gap in the 1930 photo. The sealed stair was real, and it wasn't decorative. It was a working route, built with intention, then entombed with equal intention. But it still wasn't the answer. Stairs are not destinations. They are choices. The destination was waiting in the debris. Behind the bricked frame, on the floor of the walled-off corridor, lay a flattened metal sign, face down, as if someone had stepped on it in a hurry and never looked back. When Ray turned it over, the painted letters were chipped but legible. Relief intake, lower level use rear entrance, a direction, an instruction, a system designed to keep certain bodies from passing through the marble. Eliza tried to retreat into bureaucracy then, offering historical context the way people offer blankets. Thin, polite, meant to cover discomfort. She produced meeting minutes from a 1930 Emergency Relief Committee, chaired by merchants and bankers, advocating efficiency in distributing aid. She produced a ledger of disbursements and a list of approved households. It all looked clean, it all sounded clean, until Celeste noticed the margins. In the ledger, beside certain names, there were codes, 2 letters and a number, repeating with rhythmic certainty. R2 appeared again and again, but so did LH and ME and SA, not accounting codes, routing codes, as if applicants were being moved through stations. Frank Soloway, who had been listening with his jaw clenched, said quietly, "LH could be lodging house." And in that same archive box, folded inside a thin envelope, was a complaint letter addressed to the mayor's office dated December 1930. A woman wrote that her husband had gone to apply for relief, was directed to the rear entrance, and taken below. She said he came back with bruises and refused to say why. She said a clerk told her in a whisper that men were being sent to work crews to earn eligibility, night hauling, demolition, jobs arranged through private contracts. She used a phrase that landed like a stone. "They say it's help. It feels like punishment." There was no official response attached, only a note, clipped to the letter, typed and unsigned. Handle internally. January 1931. The initials in pencil. The bricked door. The most plausible reconstruction is also the ugliest. The bank offered space for the city's relief intake to keep the process orderly, and in doing so, it helped design the flow. Public trust upstairs, private sorting downstairs. Applicants who couldn't bear to be seen entered through the alley, were processed in receiving room 2, routed through interviews and examinations, and, when deemed able-bodied, handed off to labor crews tied to contracts that benefited men who sat in rooms like this one. It wasn't supernatural. It was administrative. A staircase built to move desperation discreetly from street level into a machine. So why seal it? Because a machine only works as long as it looks like mercy. Newspapers from early 1931 carried small stories about relief irregularities, an inquiry, a resignation. Nothing that would have satisfied the families who felt harmed, but enough to prompt an urgent architectural correction. Enough to make someone, perhaps Edmund L. Marn, perhaps someone like him, take a photograph during the sealing, label it, and file it away as if paper could absorb guilt. The stair is still sealed today. The bank wants it that way. The building wants it that way. And yet the photograph exists, stubborn as a bruise beneath makeup, reminding us that institutions don't just hold money. They hold power, and power prefers private roots. If this left you with that tight feeling behind the ribs, leave a like, subscribe, and comment.